Hi, my name is Michael Seiler, and I'm here to share with you the results of a study published in the Journal of Real Estate Finance and Economics, and the title of the study is The Effect of Perceived Lender Characteristics and Market Conditions on Strategic Mortgage Defaults. To understand the premise of this paper, I want to introduce something called the ultimatum game. The ultimatum game is very famous in economics. It's been played under many conditions across a long period of time by many different parties and for many different amounts. Here's how the game works. We have two players, and in the simplest form, we're going to play just one round, and after this round, the two players are going to go their separate ways. This takes out concepts of reciprocity and cooperation and so forth. But here's how the game works. Player number one takes $10, and they get to decide how it's going to be allocated. Let's say player one says they're going to get $6 and player two is going to get $4. They make that proposal to player two. If player two accepts, then each party takes what has been allocated by the first player. And if player two says, no, I'm not going to do this, then neither party gets anything. And again, there's only one round. So if you think about it from a purely traditional, purely wealth maximization standpoint, player number two should take any deal that is a penny or above. Any non-zero offer player two should accept, because if player two doesn't accept it, they'll get zero. So that's from a purely wealth maximization standpoint. And study after study, time after time, has found that that's not the way player two behaves. Player two will oftentimes walk away. They'll leave that money on the table, so to speak. They'll walk away because they want to penalize player one for being greedy or unfair. And this concept is called inequity aversion. People don't like being mistreated, and they're willing to forego income or wealth in order to penalize that greedy party, the unfair party. So I simply took this concept and I applied it to real estate, strategic mortgage default. So as I know from many other studies, there's a great animosity between homeowners, people who are borrowing money, and the lenders from whom they're borrowing the money. And we could go back and forth about the stories, but my central hypothesis is this. If a borrower perceives the lender to be greedy or have treated them unfair in any way, shape, or form, will that cause a differential rate of strategic mortgage default? And I thought there might be a couple of intervening variables here. So for example, would it matter if we were talking about a local bank where you've been doing business with them for many years? Maybe your children are on the same soccer team, maybe you go to church together. Would that be any different than if your lender was a distant bank? Maybe you found them on a website and you've never really met them before, but you did the transaction online. Would that make any difference whatsoever? Is it harder to default on a person as opposed to a nameless, faceless institution? The other thing that we looked at, a variant, was what if the bank was particularly greedy? What if they took government bailout funds? What if they made subprime loans and really tried to gouge people? Would you consider an egregious bank easier to default on than a financially conservative bank? Then the other thing we said was, well, what about if defaults were extremely common versus they were extremely uncommon? If everyone is doing a behavior around you, the taboo is not really there. Maybe you'll find it easier to default than if you're the only person doing something that most people view as immorally, and just not morally correct. So we tested these hypotheses on a number of people, 880 homeowners specifically, and I even did a robustness check of 36 Mortgage Banker Association members in the local community. And before I even got to those studies and found which ones are significant of those variants or not, I wanted to get a sense of what do people really know about their banks. And so here's what I did. I said, of all the banks that are out there, how many of them took government bailout funds? How many of them are egregious? Well, homeowners think that 2 to 3 times as many banks are egregious than not. And that's a bit troubling. And then I asked, okay, specifically naming certain banks. Some of them were even local. And I said, which one of these banks received government bailout funds? And people only scored correct on that 52% of the time. That's basically the same as a random coin flip. So they have no idea, in other words. It was a guess. You could have just guessed down the whole line and gotten equivalently the same score. So what we find in the results is that people are absolutely more willing to default on that distant bank. They're absolutely more willing to default on the financially egregious bank. Now that's a bit troubling because On top of that, we found that they really have no idea which bank has done wrong. They really have no idea how many banks have done wrong, and they think the number is even worse. And they're willing to punish these banks that are egregious. Now add to that another layer. What I was asking is, who is your bank? Who do you have your loan with? And they gave me an answer. And then I said, who actually owns your loan? And 77% of the time and 89.2% of the time, depending on which sample you're talking about, they thought that the owner of their loan was also their servicer of the loan. Freddie Mac owns about half the mortgages in this country, and they don't service any of them. So I called around, I tried to find out what the accurate answer is to that question. Nobody seemed to know, but we know it can't be anywhere near 50% because Freddie Mac owns that many loans and they don't service any of them. So people think that the servicer is the owner of their note. Let me explain what this means. If you write a mortgage check or you auto-draft it out of your bank account, it goes to a certain person. That person is a servicer. It is very unlikely that that person also owns your underlying note. So when you are willing to punish these people, and when you think lenders have done much more wrongdoing than they have, you think you're punishing the owner of your loan, but you're really punishing the servicer. And that's very scary. So people in sum are willing to punish folks, but they're not even the right folks. And they're much more willing to punish people than they should be because they're not accurate on how wrong banks have behaved. So that's our general concept. And it's an alarm that is being sent off because people, first of all, the strategic mortgage default decision, if people are willing to do it, should be focused on the right folks. So what are the takeaways from this? Well, if I own my notes, I certainly want to go through a servicer who has a squeaky clean reputation. Number two, if I am a servicer, then I'd like to promote, if I haven't done these wrongdoing things, I'd like to promote a squeaky clean image so that people aren't more likely to default on my loans. This is a high-level summary. If you want to know more information, please see my study on our website. Thank you.